So hair loss has nothing to do with follicles, and all this time, the trigger was right in our face. I am Mickey BS, and this is Back to the Barber. Imagine looking through your vow renewal pictures from Jamaica and noticing something pretty peculiar. I saw that all the men at my wedding had haircuts and were nicely groomed. I also witnessed more than one actual wedding on the same weekend, and I saw the same thing at every ceremony. Now, I wasn't shabby at all, but I didn't go to the barber to get my hair cut. I was Norwood 7 and had been at that time for over a decade. So I did what many men do in this case and trimmed my beard myself. It was nice, not bad at all, but looking back at the pictures, it was not wedding nice. But it was the norm for me. I was used to trimming everything myself and hadn't stepped in a barbershop in a very long time unless I was taking one of my sons. At that moment, a few days after my vow renewal, I made up my mind that I will find my way back to the barber. If it's the last thing I do, I will get my hair back. Fast forward to today, and I've spent over 10 years researching on and off, but in the last 3 years straight, obsessive without a break, learning, researching, absorbing, testing herbs, building products, testing tools, exchanging information, Google Scholar, Google Patents, Reddit, Quora, websites, commercial product research, pharmaceutical research, blogs, articles, white papers, research papers, all countries from 60 years to today, bro science, real science, pseudoscience, comments, holistic solutions, natural, ancient, and even some quite unorthodox and dangerous ones. Right now, I have about 60 or 70 journal videos at various stages ready to be released. When you combine all of this sincere effort, eventually a picture began to emerge, and I call this phrase, scalp conditions must be met and maintained. That phrase, along with several other new words I've created, I threw around kind of like the alpha and omega scalp, regrowth threshold, feminine follicles, hair loss undetectable, the second head, natty, and much more. I have already designed everything from tools to equations and several products that don't exist as of yet on the market. I say this to say I've put in work, and I am passionate about not just the work, but the outcome for many of you. See, trailblazing is fulfilling. It's fun at times, it's rewarding, but also leaves you isolated, stretched, and having very little previous experiences online to reference. But I knew that coming into it, and that drew me in as well. But here's one of the drawbacks of being first. You are mistake prone. You don't know what you don't know, and everything is much slower, much more complicated, and much more distortion and confusion in the beginning. I would have done things much different if I knew then what I know now. You get my drift. And in this short video, I am going to discuss a relatively new concept or theory. I didn't make it, but formed it from the various inputs, insights, data points, and conversations as I was actively looking for this answer for really over a decade. Here is my current viewpoint of hair loss. I mean male pattern balding or androgenic alopecia specifically. There's a trigger, say gluten in the gut, in my case, gut bacteria, biome congregate into the scalp, and eventually take over and reach a point where the natural biome is overtaking. Inflammation begins to happen, which invites androgens or DHT. This causes the feminine follicles to go off balance and suffer from starvation. Many state that DHT attacks the follicles, and I say the only way it does that is if it's inflamed or hostilely taken over by a foreign invader, which bacteria fit that profile. I go further to state that fibrosis, inflammation, and plaque submerge the follicles and create a semi-permanent hair loss state. As the scalp worsens, hair loss does also. See, I always took the other alopecias into consideration in hair loss, and from the very beginning, I was looking at how they were connected. My assumption, and still is a theory that I believe in, is all alopecias are the same with any mammals. All of them are based on the immune response, and most of them are reversible, except androgenic alopecia supposedly, but we know that is not true either. Even my theory has holes in it, and many of you have asked the same questions. Why would a young man having more DHT but more hair, Why would you grow a beard and hair in your ears, but you can't grow on the head? And why would the scalp bald, but the rest of the body has hair, unless it's truly a trait like height or eye color? You are destined to be bald because it's your body's final form, is what many people believe. I find it hard to believe, but I understand why people say that. Heck, the Hamilton-Norwood pattern shows an universal balding pattern in human males so precise that we have a chart of its progression. If that doesn't point to DNA or genetics, then what does? Believe me, I have thought about all of this, and more times than I like to admit, I have more questions, doubts, reversals, and confusion and backsliding than many of you listening. Its trigger, immune response, hormonal imbalance, vasodilation circulation issues, and then the mechanical physical changes. I call this the path, and in several videos I call this the path or doorways that we all step through in some capacity as we lose hair and experience hair loss. But something bugged me this entire time. Yes, I say plaque is a solidified version of DHT, either contains it or magnifies it. Yes, I say that the scalp has a kind of atherosclerosis of the vessels and the arteries. Yes, I acknowledge that the follicles are in a dormant intelligent state, a coma, and not dead. Yes, the Hamilton-Norwood pattern is the human growth pattern of infants in reverse as conditions worsens. It is obvious to me that hair loss is not programmed, but a side effect of scalp conditions not being met, which means male pattern balding is more closer to an allergic reaction shared by men in the family than their final form. Yet, there was one question that plagued me about alopecia in general. If inflammation comes from the gut, and if the immune system of the follicles are fighting off inflammation, why and how can you have a bald man with a beard down to his chest? Why would you have hairy legs but a bald crown? How can men have thick eyebrows and hair coming out of their rears, which has to be more bacteria ridden by the way, than the scalp, which is probably one of the cleanest areas on our bodies? Why does the scalp get attacked and not our ear hair of all things? Earwax, grime, dirt, dark, moist, but we have hair there. Our pubic hairs, right? Let's not forget those. Yes, we can have a full 70 corn star afro down there, but Norwood 6 on the head. That really bugged me, and I instinctively knew the answer, or at least a working theory, would have to be in order if I was really trying to not only reverse my own hair loss to undetectable, but help other men build a protocol for its reversal. It was my Achilles heel. Now that you have a brief understanding, I think I have kind of figured it out, or at least I have a new working theory that I can now use, test, and build towards the elusive general theory of hair loss reversitivity that I have been working on for the past 3 years or more. Shout out to Einstein. But if this theory is closer to right or near right, then a major cornerstone of my first theory about the trigger, therefore the path of natural restoration, needs an adjustment. I bet you are wondering why I use the Home Depot colors and brand on this thumbnail. Once I explain to you the mistake I made and the adjustment that pretty much allows male pattern balding and all other non-scarring alopecias to be reversed, is quite simple. Time considerations are still heavy, but the complexity goes away. So here goes. Instead of thinking of the second head, that is plaque, inflammation, and fibrosis, as a mistake by the body, and it skips every other organ, places on the body, or hair on the body to decide to bald in the scalp, what if the scalp is like the waist of men? Ever notice how men carry their weight in their stomach? If you look at the actual weight and scan the body, you will see that it is visceral fat. What if, just what if the scalp of men, instead of developing fat deposits, it collects the toxins of men and or the lipids that are supposed to be drained from the body? What if the scalp, as porous as it is, other function is to excrete waste that is left over by the body? What if the scalp is the toxin depot? What if the second head that develops and overlays on top of the gallia is not from scalp inflammation, but the other way around? What if the inflammation comes from the fact that the scalp does not release the toxins, say heavy metals, product sludge, processed foods, artificial cleaners, hard water, in a timely fashion by the body, and that causes swelling and inflammation? Instead of inflammation being the cause, It is a side effect of an undrained toxicity. Now, if you think about this, in regards to other alopecia, even women's alopecia, you will see that inflammation, acne, redness, tenderness, tension is followed by hair loss. But you will also notice, just like men, fibrosis and oily skin is associated to hair fall. If a woman is in her 50s going through menopause and aging, her organs will not be the same state as when she was 30. Therefore, what would not cause inflammation and systematic issues at an earlier age would do so at 50 years of age. And eventually, she, like men in male pattern balding, will need a place to store the toxins, lipids, biome, and pathogens if and when her body is no longer functioning ideally. Looking at hair loss from a man's perspective, ours is much slower, but harder to reverse because androgens and cholesterol go hand in hand. This means to me that the only difference between you and your sister is you have the androgens, which means more DHT. The only saving grace from your mother not looking like her brother is that she has less of the hormone. But in this case, it's not about the volume of DHT as much as why DHT is attracted to the scalp in the first place. Going back to the analogy of the young man who has 3 times the DHT and testosterone of an older man, this new theory or extension of the theory is that the scalp is acting as an involuntary backup depot of the old man's waste-releasing excretory system. While the young man's system is fresh, he has less problems, the older man will have more toxins, thus DHT will be more attracted to his depot. Although a slight adjustment to the previous theory where DHT just happens to end up in the scalp follicles and not the armpit or the beard nor the eyebrows. If the scalp acts as a dumping ground, then androgenic alopecia totally makes sense. How does this relate to Home Depot? Besides the obvious word depot, at the store you can find everything that you need for the most part for your house or home. Totally opposite, in an androgenic scalp, you can find everything in the scalp that should not be in your home at all. The home, the body. Let's look at what happens when it does. If you can recall, the second head plaque overlay is due to inflammation caused by inflammation agents dumped in the scalp by other organs such as the liver or the small intestine. The lipid system of the scalp gets overrun and eventually it clogs so bad that it calcifies. With acute and chronic inflammation, fibrosis, the cooking of the scalp happens, as well as atherosclerosis of the scalp vessels plaque over due to the inflammation. The body quarantines the gallia, but it was a culprit in the first place. The scalp being hot, fatty, with great blood flow is an ideal place for dumping pathogens to set up shop that are not released due to clogging. This may be the reason why it's not necessarily targeted, but severely affected, unlike your arm hair. So how does this depot theory help you in your hair loss restoration efforts? First, you know that DHT accumulation in the scalp is the body's medicine for inflammation, but the follicles themselves have absolutely nothing to do with male pattern balding like we assumed. No, it's not about DHT sensitivity as much as it's about the overaccumulation of plaque submerging the follicles, thus not starving them like we have been told, but drowning them is a more appropriate term. Follicle asphyxiation, not starvation. This is why I state hair loss reversal is about subtraction, not addition. Addition is what caused hair loss, and subtraction is how it begins to reverse. Knowing this, it can be assumed that you have a systematic issue that doesn't allow the cleansing or releasing of toxic agents naturally from the body. Because of this, you are storing them in the most likely area for their release, and that is, yes, like I said, the scalp. As a matter of fact, this depot is not by accident. It seems to be designed like everything else. Secondly, the depositing of the toxins in the scalp is organized and not random at all. You will find that the crown area of severely bald men have a hunk of looks to be flesh, but it's not flesh in that sense. It is interstitial fluid, plaque, and cholesterol surrounding the toxins. Then that causes the gallia to inflame, which activates DHT production, which then creates dermal plaque that eventually drowns the follicles with the second head. You can visually see this second head if you look closely. The Hamilton-Norwood pattern may be the signature of the severity level of the deposits. So ironically, the follicle's makeup or design has nothing to do with hair loss. And that is probably why the hair follicles in the most grimiest, filthiest, most bacteria-ridden places on the body, such as the anus, do just fine. They've been the spectators and the victims all along, not the cause. Third, the scalp was always the backup depot, but it can only hold so much before it collapses. Thus, age is related. It is supposed to be a temporary storage and not permanent. So why do certain men develop the second head to the extreme and experience severe hair loss and others don't seem to? I can tell you this, the level or the size of the second head or the amount of foreign deposits in the depot equals to the amount of hair loss severity. Perhaps, just perhaps, men that have male pattern balding gene have a body that is more inclined or prone to store toxins in the scalp than other places in the body. If we have the same amount of test, but you store more bacteria and pathogens in the scalp, you will bald more rapidly and more severe. DHT will accumulate more in the scalp and less in the other areas probably. Even if women also store toxins in the scalp, which they do, we would see them lose hair as they age, but never bald like men as they don't have the androgen count to do so. This may mean the scalp depot manifests in men because androgens overproduce plaque and therefore clog the drainage system, whereas finasteride dissolves plaque or inhibits DHT production that stops the second head from forming. You and your twin sister, you're bald and she is not. The only difference, she doesn't have the androgen quantity to clog the dermal layers, attempting to rid the scalp of foreign invaders deposited for eventual release, thus causing more inflammation and plaque buildup, fibrosis, and skin layers. This is the closest theory to solving the paradox of men's hair loss. See, the entire time up to recently, I was looking for a mutual place or similar trigger that can cause hair loss, and it doesn't have to be. I was off base, and that lengthened my time of reversal and led me down some dead-end paths in natural restoration. Simply put, men will have more androgens and DHT. That is universal, and that natural solve will follow inflammation. But it creates even more localized inflammation as it sits in the depot, forcing the snowballing effect. This in itself isn't ideal, but the true culprit of hair loss is drowning. In conclusion, everything else fits within this theory. Tension, circulation issues, tenderness, all symptoms of the second head, which is a visual representation of the scalp depot system clogged by plaque DHT. I was right about one thing, however. Scalp purging is the most important hair loss reversal aspect, not DHT inhibiting, not circulation, not massaging, not tension. Purging, if done correctly, eventually the previously overrun drainage system reverses to normalcy. This is the stage I am at now, by the way. Fingers crossed. So knowing this information, how can you apply it to your hair loss efforts? Remove or subtract the additions via purging. Inhibit androgens like you've been taught. Keep the follicle stimulated as in minoxidil or natural stimulants. Our traditional methods are not wrong. However, understand that if the scalp is being used as a second toxin storage, you probably have a lipid draining issue or a gut issue or some sort of problem with the cleansing of your overall body. So instead of the trigger for hair loss as gluten or cooked foods, those are indirect. The trigger would be the immune system's reaction and the androgens overreaction to the depot's contents overstaying their welcome. Like, comment, subscribe, and follow me to part 2, where I go into a starter regimen or protocol for the reversal of the mechanical physical changes of the second head or the scalp depot to help you get your high school hairline back. It's about time, as iron sharpens iron and we only have each other. And remember, if I can do it, you all can do it too. Let's get you back to the barber.